Kaitlyn's new book. Feel free to purchase copies after. We're going to sell them over there. And Jana is also going to be here to sign them for you. And we are very pleased to have Panda TV here tonight covering the event for us. We're so happy. Thank you so much for coming. Let's get started. Walk Our Way New York City, the book we're talking about tonight, is a walking tour guide with 10 curated walks through different New York City neighborhoods, written by Jana and Kaitlyn Allen, who can't be here tonight, and also features beautiful illustrations by Asia Ohan. Also, unfortunately, she can't be here tonight. It's a book celebrating the city's history and especially the women that shaped the city, but also American history and society, and women's rights. And it will be I think it's an interesting guide for seasoned visitors to the city, for people who grew up in the city and think they know it pretty well, but I think it's a book that will have something for everyone. It's also not just a tour book for women, it's a book for everyone, for all genders, to explore the city from a new perspective. Welcome, Jana. Jana is the Director of Academic Programs at the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities at Bard College. She has a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Munich and has taught at the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And Asheville will be discussed tonight as well. And has also taught at the Juilliard School, and I think this is where all her ideas for how to walk through New York City with a different kind of eye come from. But she'll tell us all about that later. Her research focuses on 19th century literature and art, women writers of the 19th century, and also environmental humanities. And she has a first novel, had published a first novel in Germany in 2018, and works at the intersection of theory and practice. And I like that we're talking about a very practice-focused approach to women's history tonight, and I'm excited to have you all in conversation. There will be a Q&A at the end where you can also ask questions. Thank you. All right. So how did you first come up with the idea of writing this book?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jelka. Thank you for having me. Kaitlyn Allen, my co-author, is also a dear friend of mine. We lived in Asheville in North Carolina we lived there together for about 5 or 6 years. We met in 2014. She's an art historian. I worked at a bookstore at the time. I was also teaching. I had just moved to the United States, and I met Kaitlyn at a bookstore. I was a barista, and she walked in and she sat down, and we started chatting, and immediately became friends. And we would go on walks together and just walk and talk about art and writing and our work. And in 2017, she was in Norwich in England for a year, and I still remember we were sitting in the backyard. She studied there. She got her master's degree in art history, and we were sitting in the backyard, and we had some drinks and we were chatting, and it was a city that I traveled to, that I wanted to explore as a tourist, and she lived in at the time. And I was like, okay, let's go out, let's go for a walk, let's explore. And I was like, where should we go? So we started walking and talking more about our interests. And so really out of those conversations and going to then also a bookstore in Norwich to see if we can find a cool travel guide that doesn't just list like the regular known landmarks, but maybe some hidden history. We're like, well, it would be so cool to have like a walking guide that highlights, just sites that you may not, that are not in your regular travel guide. And so it was really something that we just wished we had at that moment. And then we sat down, and it wasn't like immediately that we said, oh, let's now start writing a book. Let's call it Walk Away and Curated Walks, and then try to get it published. But we slowly started thinking about the idea to look for hidden stories in cities. And we started doing that in Norwich, and then I was only there for a week. I was back in Asheville, and I lived at a historic old nunnery in Asheville at the time, in a part of the town that was called Mudford. And Kaitlyn lived not far away. She would come over. We talked more about the space that I was in, the nunnery, and we were thinking about the stories of the women in that space. And so also always going back to the idea of having a book, a travel guide with walks, like hidden stories. And then we found out across the street there used to be a hospital where Zelda Fitzgerald was hospitalized. And it burned down, and she died in that fire. So then we started researching Zelda, and that's also, we dedicated the book to Zelda because in a way she was the first woman that became part of our research. And with her, first we were in Asheville, and then it happened because she passed away on March 10th, so this month. It happened to be also March at the time, and there were a couple of events going on in the city for Women's History Month, but also for Zelda. And there's a Zelda Fitzgerald, I think, organization. And so we tried to get in touch with them. We visited some archives, and I was like, well, but what do we do with that? And then, I mean, that was 2017, so now 25, so 8 years ago. We then started just like looking at other women in Asheville. And then first we had the idea of making like an archive, but we're both book lovers and book people, and so the idea of just having like a digital archive, like it always felt like, what do you do then with it, right? Then you have this archive, but then what? So we then very briefly had a podcast just to also, it was very important to us, I think, to just keep on working on something, even though we did not really know just yet what it's gonna be. But we knew that there's an idea and we have to kind of like just like stick to it. And so we had weekly meetings. We still have them every week for at least an hour. We would get together. And we had a podcast, we had a radio show in New York City with Montes Press Radio for a year in 2019. And so while we were like still thinking about different formats of this research, I moved to New York in 2019. I started teaching at BART a couple years later, but I became a visiting scholar at the Hannah Arendt Center. And so then our focus switched from Asheville to New York because we realized there's more possibilities, and also more people travel to New York, so there may be a bigger demand, and then for me to be there made things much easier. So yeah, New York really just because #1 travel destination in the United States, and then okay, we're gonna do New York City, women in New York, and then Kaitlyn would visit me, so this time she came into New York, and we would walk the streets of New York City, and then we would learn about artists and writers and where they wrote a book and where they were born, or where there was a demonstration that took place, and it immediately changes how you look at the place, right? As soon as you know who lived there or what book was written there, it changes everything. It was the same as like finding out about the history of the nuns in the building I lived in, and you would like, I don't know, imagine how they walked through the door. And I was just actually on the way over because in my apartment there were these little holes in the wall, these niches where they put Virgin Marys, and I'm sure there's a word for it, and I don't know what the word is, but you know, you would like just picture how they had the Virgin Marys in there and lived in those places. So we settled on New York. We had a radio show that kept us going, because also we both had full-time jobs and no publishing deal in sight. That was not the problem. Maybe I should stop. I could just like fill half an hour with the story. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
Because now I'm like, I was thinking about the illustrations that how they came in.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I should keep going.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept to have a walking tour guide that's also a tourist guide that doesn't have pictures of the actual places. And so I imagine, I haven't taken one of those walks yet. The book just came out. It's still winter. I didn't feel exactly drawn to the city this time of year.
For some reason, we always ended up in New York City in the wintertime to go on these walks, and there were definitely times it was brutal. It's just like 1 week straight. They wanted to like publish it for Women's History Month.
Women's History Month is famously in March. So not a good time of the year for walking outside, but
there is no bad
times for women to be in the streets.
No, exactly.
And bad centuries for women to be in the streets, because what we talked about when we prepared the event, we also talked about how women walking the streets alone was at a time kind of a revolutionary concept. Women were not allowed to go outside without a male chaperone. And I think you told me about Macy's opening up a new opportunity for women to be outside in the streets. That meaning women that didn't have a job, not working class women, but women of like a higher social standing who were allowed to go outside, to have a place to be outside of the house and a reason to go outside. So that's an interesting fact. Connected to walking.
It was so much fun working on this book, because you would come across all these little stories, and I'm not a historian, but we were just curious, and then we learned that we knew in the 19th century women were not supposed to walk alone outside in New York City. And that significantly changed with department stores opening up and women meeting in department stores to go shopping. So Macy's was definitely like the first kind of like like a social, like a club or like a public space. They also started having little tea houses within department stores. So it was interesting. Macy's is now also in the book.
You want to talk about the publishing deal?
Okay, so
so how did you had the idea? How did you approach this book with? How did you find a publisher for this book?
Right. So at a certain point, our first walk that we created was Chinatown. And Chinatown, after working on it for, I think, feels like months or no, years, actually 2 years, and then also going to the city several times to go on the actual walk and learn a lot about curating walks and how to do that, we then thought, okay, it would be really nice to know that there's a book inside, instead of just like keep on curating walks and working on this and not knowing if it's gonna be a book. So then with that one chapter, we started approaching publishing houses, but pretty quickly we realized it's not really, like with a novel, of course, you just have your abstract, your proposal, your expose, and you send it in. But with this book, so much about it is just about the visuals and the maps and seeing the women at work and in their spaces. So it felt really hard convincing a publishing house to take this on with just sending in a Word document and listing the stops, because that's just half of the book. The other half is bringing it together on the page and the maps. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go on. And then my dear friend Asia, who lives in the Hudson Valley, she's a yoga. Unfortunately, she's sick tonight. Otherwise, she would have joined us. But we started talking about the project, and we asked her to illustrate that first walk, Chinatown, to just have a couple of illustrations to send in and have some visuals. And that made a huge difference. Kaitlyn and I tried for 2 years. I mean, just horrific documents where we tried to visualize this idea. You go back and it's just embarrassing. But then suddenly with Asia's illustrations, it made a huge difference. And so we sent it to, I'm pretty sure, like 60 plus publishing houses. And this is my 4th book, so I'm very used to that. Or it's just like, this was a new project. My other books were published in German publishing houses, so we needed to find a new home for this, for like a nonfiction travel book, and we didn't know anyone at a travel publishing house, so we just went the official route. And then I can tell that little okay, that little story. Well, a small publishing house in Brooklyn took it on. We got an email back pretty quickly, and they were super excited. And of course, like when you work on something for years and someone suddenly says like, yes, let's turn this into a book, very excited. And it was small, but I published, when my first novel came out with a small publishing house, it's not necessarily bad. Sometimes it's actually nice because it's very like, you have a direct person you work with, it's just more intimate. And so we were excited. We started because the book was not done yet. We had that first chapter and then several drafts and the idea. And they were like, okay, let's get this published. We came out of the pandemic, people want to be outside, they want to walk, this is a great time, let's do this. And we were like, you have half a year to finish all the walks. We were like, okay, of course we can do this.
Lots of walking in 6 months.
Oh yeah, lots of walking, yeah. Oh my God, the pain is coming back. It's just like, when you walk in New York City, and that's also a thing that we tried to do with the walks, it's just not overwhelmed, because walking in a park or trails in the woods is a little different than walking in a big city like New York. So we got it all done, and then our editor at the publishing house started making very radical and drastic changes to the book that we thought were too far away from the original idea. For example, I mean, this is a book about women, and so of course the introduction to the book highlighted some spaces connected to women in New York City. This introduction was changed, men were put in. Suddenly the introduction started with some important. And we're like, well, yeah, these are great men, and they've been highlighted and they're wonderful, and like I've read their books and they're great, but it's not really a place for them. Not the point of the book. So then it became really heated, and we had lots of discussion, and it was hard. We were so close. We had a cover, we had a publication date, the walks were done. Asia worked non-stop, while also we all had other full-time jobs to get this book done. And we get the manuscript back, the edited manuscript, and it's just not a book anymore. It's not. And it was supposed to come out in October 2023. You may still see some ghosts online of that book. And we were like, this is not our book. We can't do it. We can't do it. And we pulled out, and that was really hard because we did not know, is it gonna come out again? But then we were also fired up, and we were like, okay, let's try the really big publishing houses now. And we sent it to 5, because now it was done, and all the illustrations were done, and we had basically the finished product. So we went back to our original manuscript that we believed in. We took all of Asia's illustrations, we sent it to Hardy Grant, and 24 hours later, they emailed us, they want to publish the book. And So we learned a lot. I'm not saying this so much. It's like, it was brave in a way, but also, like, we still all had our full-time jobs. Like, we didn't depend on it financially. So in a way, we were able to play with it. We did have to pay back in advance, and that hurt a little because it was already spent on walking in New York City and going to coffee shops. But it just, like, looking back, I think Kaitlyn and I, it's become quite the walk for us as well, in an interesting way, working with that editor, and then also just like highlighting women who tried to make it and were not given publishing deals or were censored. So we had our little moment.
It's also a women in publishing story, old as time.
Yeah. But I just want to say that now with Hardy Grant, it's been in really good hands and a wonderful team. I think they did a great job. I was talking to some of you earlier when we got the book, which just like went like this because it feels nice, and it was really important to us that it has a good size that you can take with you. You can put it in your bag, but it's still a book. Like, we didn't want to just make an audiobook that you can listen to that may come at some point.
Yeah. So throughout that whole publishing adventure, did you, when you went on these walks, did you have like how did you curate the individual walks? Did you somehow group it together in neighborhoods where it was close enough, or were there other ideas how these walks came together? Because what I noticed while reading it was that you have very important historical figures who achieved great things for women's rights, suffragettes, and then you also have Carrie Bradshaw and a more entertaining side to it. So how did you bring all this together that it's still it makes a coherent walk in a way?
Thanks. So in a way, it's definitely, of course, it's a political book, but we also wanted to make a light and fun book. We wanted people to, it's about celebrating achievements and community, really. And so it was really important to us to bring in all different aspects of that. And for those of us who grew up, maybe in the 90s, Sex in the City, Carrie Bradshaw, The Steps, she also walked a lot. It's just like when you brought her up earlier, she was walking a lot in New York City in heels. And so I respect that. And I think there were some, in Sex and the City there are some important topics discussed. So in a way, it is, it's also entertainment and...
you also mentioned Miranda Hobbs. Cynthia Nixon, who became an important LGBTQ plus activist after or at the tail end of the career with Sex and the City. So,
so it's definitely connected. And to your question about curating walks, but that was definitely an interesting process too, to say, because of course we could have just said we make a list of all, and I think there's a book actually that came out while we were working on this about women in New York City 2 years ago or so. But to experience again the women in their spaces and to be out and look at the space was a really important aspect for us. That then we're like, let's create walks, and I'd say probably both of us, Kaitlyn and I, always started with one landmark, one place, one person. And then it was a lot of maps, just actual maps, looking at what works and what's close by, and then building from there. And then also, every walk feels different. It's really interesting. It's not something that we necessarily planned because we also didn't know. I did not grow up in this country. I visited New York City, but I did not grow up there. and so did Kaitlyn. She did not grow up in New York City. So for us to experience Chelsea, Soho, Chinatown, Harlem, and then know about the neighborhoods, but then suddenly notice that all these walks definitely have a very distinct vibe, was interesting. And I can give you one example. I am at the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College, so of course for me Hannah Arendt had to be in the book. It's like no questions asked. But unfortunately, she lived in a neighborhood where we did not have a walk. On the Upper West Side, there's just like, it's very, it's like lots, it's just residential. And I mean, we could have expanded this book. We could have made 20 more walks, but also, again, this was supposed to be something that you can put in your pocket. And maybe there's going to be a volume 2, hopefully. And then there's going to be more walks in other parts of New York City. So she lived there, and we had a Harlem walk, and then we put her in, but it was a detour, and it just did not feel right because we had a lot of jazz singers and pianists in Harlem and Harlem Renaissance writers. And so, and then suddenly it was like Hannah Arendt, and it just did not work. And so we moved her, just to answer your question about curating walks. That is one thing that we learned, that it kind of has to fit. You can't just like randomly put these sites together, even though they may all be in one place. The other thing is, of course, that it has to be a good walking distance. You want to make sure that things are not too far, and not close is fine, but also different sites. It's nice to have a museum in a walk. It's nice to have a place like houses or birthplace or where a book was written, but not have just like 10 of those.
And sculptures.
Yeah, yeah. To just mix it up a little bit. I can say one more thing.
Yeah.
Oh, are you doing on time?
Oh, we're good.
We're good. Okay. One thing that I really love about these walks, and I hope everyone who goes on them will too, is that it takes you to places where you would otherwise not have gone, just because when you use a regular travel guide, you have your landmark, and then maybe you even take the subway or public transportation. You go there, you go back, or you connect it to another site somewhere in the city, but then you take public transportation there. By walking the neighborhoods, and again, this connects back to just the vibe of the different walks, you suddenly walk a street that does not necessarily have a landmark or would not be in a travel guide, but just gives you like a really good sense of the neighborhood. So Chinatown, for example, Harlem, we walked through beautiful neighborhood, brownstones that we would have not gone to. And so, yeah, I think...
yeah, that's amazing. I think that's my favorite kind of tourism, to just walk into neighborhoods. And I know a lot of people who just prefer walking and not. I mean, when you're in New York City, you obviously, if you come from abroad, you want to see the classics, the highlights. You have to tell your people at home that you went to Times Square, although everybody else, there's no reason to go to Times Square really. But and I think there, growing number of people who like this kind of slow tourism,
slowing down.
Just finding a place to breathe and to collect your thoughts and process what you see all day. So I think that's what these walks are also good for too.
Yeah, even before I got published, people who knew that I'm working on this book emailed me. It's like, I have people visit. Can you come to the city and take us on one of the walks? That would be really perfect, because you don't want to, like, then you end up collecting ideas and try to curate them together into like an activity with friends who are visiting, and that way now it's all done already.
That's perfect. Is there a walk? Do you have a favorite walk, and also do you have? Let's start with a favorite walk. What's your favorite walk, or the one that you would recommend starting?
I really like the Roosevelt Island walk. Elena, we went on the Roosevelt Island walk together in June. It was such a beautiful, beautiful day. It was also the perfect weather, speaking of. it's a little cold right now, but in the summertime we'll take people on actual walks in New York City. You arrive on Roosevelt Island by tram, so you have a really beautiful view. And it's maybe a place that you kind of forget when you're in Manhattan. You may more think of like a Greenwich Village or Chinatown, but it's a perfect loop, and there's great sights, lots of cats, and I can recommend that, doing that. Yeah. I'm also, I mean, Chinatown, this is a really hard question. I can't really. Central Park, just because parks, is interesting because you walk through Central Park and you don't, it's very hidden what women did in Central Park. You mainly see monuments of horses.
Men sitting on horses.
Men sitting on, there's two big horses, and actually both were created by women. But there's no plaques, there's no names. So Central Park. And then you have the museums on one side, which is also really nice. You can stop, but you don't have to. All the walks, you could just do 3 stops to keep it short, have just half an hour walk. You can pick, or you can do the whole loop. Sometimes it starts at one point and ends at another, but we always give directions with public transportation.
Yeah, also like that you have, I think I saw recommendations for coffee shops or
shops,
lunch breaks,
Yeah.
That's a practical advice.
Yeah. I feel like I did a terrible job answering your question what my favorite walk, but it's really hard.
It's hard to pick favorites in a book that you've written yourself.
Yeah.
And is there a woman that you would like to spotlight for us tonight? Or that somebody you would like to have met in person, or somebody who inspired you?
I mean, I would smoke a cigarette with Hannah Arendt anytime. I would go with that.
Surprise.
I must say, like, maybe one other aspect that I keep asking. We're good.
Yeah, we're good. That's nice.
Half past. Okay, perfect. One more thing. Like the history of women and the fight for equality and equity in New York City is very much connected to labor rights and the garment workers. And that was very interesting to look into. So there's several activists highlighted in the book that you mentioned earlier too. And and their connection to garment work and early 19th century activism.
Yeah. Women's and workers' liberation.
Yeah, and I think that's very specific to New York City.
Yeah, that's true. So we talked about
the illustrations.
The illustrations, yeah. So Asia is not here tonight.
Yeah.
But and you talked a little bit about how the reason why you brought her in. So a question that I had was, all of these women were alive, all of these places have like real life representations, and instead of taking pictures you went with illustrations. Was it hard to find a style that would represent what these women stood for, and that would also be authentic to the place, or to the walk, to the overall appearance of the book? Because you have these beautiful, for every walk there's this beautiful map at the beginning with like portraits of these women too. And I would have liked to ask Asia today was like how did you go about creating an illustration for a person that was there and that everybody has a certain image of, but that you kind of wanted wanted them to see in a different light in the context of this book.
Yeah, thanks, Jelka. one thing that was really important to us that all women are portrayed while working or while in action. And so you would see them writing or see them painting or see them demonstrating. It was definitely a process. We wanted to make in a way like a cute fun book, but it also should not, it was not supposed to be too cute because it's still a political book, and there's a fine line. But I think, Asia did a really wonderful job with her too. We met every week for at least an hour, and it was really, there's over 200 women in this book. So we would go, and then we would all look at a map and look at the names of the map, and it's is this pin in the right place? No, you have to move it up, and a teeny tiny bit. So all of these things, it was a very collaborative process. And so it's also with the women, she would send us a draft, and then we would be like, this is amazing, but can we do her facial expression a little different? Can she maybe hold something else?
Yeah, I like that.
She was so open to
show them in a working and in an active capacity, not as a portrait, kind of frozen or still. Because the way that women, we talked about that in the beginning of our discussion, is the way that women were in public spaces or were shown in public spaces was either as workers, if they had a job that allowed them to be outside or required them to be outside a lot, but otherwise there wasn't really, at certain times at least, not a reason for women to be outside, and to show the work that often happened indoors, the writing, the activism that had to sometimes happen behind closed doors and in closed spaces for their own safety, and to show that in the book and make that visible, something that I really enjoy looking at in the illustrations.
Can you think, I was on the way over, I know we talked about Mrs. Dalloway, women walking in public spaces in books, and now I'm really curious about other books and women walking. So this is maybe a neat project.
Actually, Virginia Woolf called the walking outdoors or walking in the street, she called it street haunting. And I really like that. I think we should all haunt the streets more and be visible, and because as we see these landmarks and what women fought for 100 years ago, 120 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 30 years ago, it reminds us of the history of this fight and of the women that started it all and that made so many things possible for us, but also hopefully inspires us to be more visible in the streets and to show and to keep that movement alive. And
maybe one last thing I'm going to say is that it is a book about women, but I must say whenever a man gets really interested in the book and asking about it and does not say, I'm going to get it for my wife or my sister, that's super sweet, and that's also great. But it's also really nice to see just interest from everyone, because in the end, it's a book about humans. It's just, and so for me, having that, I was thinking of some maybe poetry collections or anthologies that were just men. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't even I did not think about that, the fact that it was just male writers. I think it's just, recently, of course, we are more aware. So in a way, it would be really nice to also not really think about this as highlighting women, but just highlighting humans and just learning about really cool stories in New York City, even though, yes, there's definitely an aspect to it that...
we want everybody to go on these
everybody walk. Walking is so,
haunt the streets, people.
Yes.
Speaking of walking, are there, I think there are Are there book tours coming in the spring?
Yeah. So we're trying to avoid the 30-degree weather because it is a little harder to walk in New York City when it's icy and cold. But we'll offer some walks in New York in the summertime, in June, July, and we'll pick some and probably combine it with a reading in some bookstores. There are some bookstores highlighted in the book. And yeah, very much looking forward to it. You can also email me. Maybe I'm just gonna become like a private tour guide to take your guests on tours.
That's awesome. And because it's called Walk Away New York City, you mentioned maybe a second New York City edition, but also will there be other cities that?
I mean, that's the dream.
Yeah.
That's what the publisher told us. If this one is doing well, then we're allowed to make a second one, and we can go to other cities and other countries. So thank you for being here.
Let's make this happen.
Yeah, but we were dreaming just other cities in the United States. New York, Workaway Boston, Workaway San Francisco, Berlin.
Yeah.
London. I mean, the sky's the limit.
That's awesome. Anything else you would like to add?
No, if there's any questions,
Yeah.
otherwise, happy to,
So I'm curious about Chinatown.
yeah.
So why was that the first? You did say that was the first walking tour that you curated for the manuscript.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to why and who were the figures or the landmarks in Chinatown?
Good question. I have no idea why we started with Chinatown. I think we were just looking at the map in Manhattan and just like highlighting, pinning different spots and places of interest to us. And then you look at the map and you kind of like see something emerging, right? Like a possible warp or a possible loop. And I think that it happened with Chinatown.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. Unfortunately, I don't have a better answer. I like Chinatown too, and I mean all walks are. But Chinatown, it starts with the Museum of Chinese with Maya Lin, and it's nice when there's a museum connected to a walk, because then you can decide if you want to go in and spend some time there and maybe get a beverage and just like hang for a moment. Or if you just go to the gift shop, or if you just want to look at the architecture, learn more about Maya Lin, who designed it, and then keep on walking. Of course, we're doing activism in Chinatown as well. We're ending with Columbus Park, where there was a big garment demonstration with garment workers. And so this is kind of like a really nice framed museum and park. And then in between, we have some food places, of course, and Chinese cuisine and tradition and history. And we actually met with a third generation Chinese food co-op in New York and their family, and they shared their insights with us and their traditions. And we have an herb shop in there also, Chinese tradition. And then we also have Audrey Munson in New York City. I don't know if you know Audrey Munson, but she's all over New York. She was a model, and she's in a lot of buildings in New York depicted, among others, in the Brooklyn Bridge. And so we're highlighting her in Chinatown because it's a nice look. Yeah. Yeah, of course, thanks, David.
I'm going to ask a similar question about Brooklyn. I live near Brooklyn Heights in Dumbo that you talked about in there. Can you share one of the walks or an interesting person that you want to highlight?
Oh, in Brooklyn?
Please.
Thanks, TJ. Ooh, interesting. I mean, all of them. So the Brooklyn and Dumbo one starts with the Brooklyn Bridge. We have a couple of spaces for women in Brooklyn, like for example the Brooklyn Women's Club, and one more, February House. So these were spaces created by women to come together and talk about the art or political issues. So we have 2 of them in there. Yeah, I think you just have to go on the walks. Every walk is super exciting. Yes, please.
I have one comment and then
Yes,
a question.
thank you.
I just want to say that it's so funny because, I mean, most of our lives you read anthologies of things. You never think I'm only reading men.
Yeah.
It's the, the norm.
Yeah.
So it never stands out. So it's funny that we still, I used to teach women in literature, and we still are having to say, that, well, it's women, but it's also men, because you never had to say, you never thought to say there were also women when it was only men. We're still dealing with some of that. So that's just that. But I wanted to know, how did you start with people, like you said, Hannah Arendt, but that you wanted to talk about and then find where they lived? Or did you think, I want to write about Chelsea, who was there? I mean, how did you do the place or the person or some combination?
Combination, thank you. Like for example, the Chelsea Hotel. There's spaces that were shared, and then we passed them. So we're like, let's add the Chelsea Hotel and highlight someone who lived there. But yeah, both. Yeah, thank you. Some were really important for us to be featured in the book, and then we were like working around that. And also, some women are obviously very known, like Billie Holiday is in the book, Patti Smith. But others, we wanted to have a good mix of people recognizing famous writers, favorites, artists, but then also a little bit of hidden history of like museums that were founded by women that you may not know about.
Yeah. Or that have been historically erased from the history as it's been told, and you just help them come back to the surface a little bit.
There's definitely like the Greenwich Village Society. They have these red flags in New York City. They're doing a great job of marking houses with like historical descriptions. But again, some monuments, you don't learn anything about the monument. You just see who's depicted, and it's actually like a really interesting story about a woman sculptor.
Yeah. Any more questions?
How did you keep the process going when you thought you had an idea, but you weren't sure what it was yet? Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you met every single week, you said.
Yeah, we met every week. Thank you. When we both lived in Asheville, Kaitlyn would come over. It was Tuesday morning before I was teaching at UNCA. She would come over with pastries and coffee, and we would sit together for 2 hours. It was every Tuesday, and sometimes life happened, and we just like we talked about what happened this past week. But it was really important to just like do it no matter what, and even if we just work on the book for 10 minutes or half an hour, or just think of the next step. So many things, creating a website, and then we're like, we need funding for this. So we founded a nonprofit organization, because then we thought, then we can apply for grants, and then maybe we can also do some outreach and activism around topics that are important to us. I mean, so many ideas. And it's like one of those things where you do 10 things, but you have to do all of 10 things in order to get one, be successful with one of them. So the nonprofit didn't go anywhere. We were also not podcasters. Like we had a podcast for a little while, but it was great when we did interviews and we had really wonderful conversations. But I'm not. No. I like to hide behind the computer and the books. Yeah. So it's like okay, but we just felt like social media. Developing like a following already so that we can then show it to the publishing house, hey, we already did all of these things. And it actually mattered. They did see that we have a social media account and a website in place and we send out newsletters. Yeah, I mean, these are all things that would be nice if we would not, it wasn't that work that we loved to do, but that was, part of the whole project, and it kept us going. Social media posts, all of it. Yeah, every week, and then we switched to Zoom. So then I lived in Germany for a while, and we still met every week. Back then it was still Skype, I think. Zoom then happened during the pandemic, but we Skyped every week. And then we started the radio show in New York City with Montes Press Radio. That happened through some connections and conversations, and it was just like, hey, do you want to have a segment in our radio show? And we were like, yeah, okay, that will also keep us going to just like put ourselves out there and just almost put pressure on ourselves to keep going. Yeah.
Did some women not really make the cut? In other words, there's infamous women that did certainly a lot of things, powerful women. Did you have sort of a standard that you wanted to keep a positive image of a woman's role rather than maybe infamous women as well?
We tried to, we were like, I think it's very nuanced. If there was like some, like around racism, sexism, I mean, for example, the monument in Central Park that was erected, the Women Pioneers Monument. I know there was some controversy around who was depicted, and then they added a third person to also represent a black woman. So there's definitely also within feminism, there's problems. And there's history, and like, so we're also, if you look at you can see these spotlights, it's not very long. It's supposed to be readable while you're walking, right? So we're not going in depth, but I'm hoping we're doing a nuanced job describing the women and not just celebrating everyone, no matter what. You only have to be a woman. You know, like, no.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You did get Hannah Harrington.
We did.
Even though she wasn't in one of the.
Yeah, she didn't live.
Were there other women that didn't make it in because, and why? You have about 200, right?
Yeah, I
Were there
counted.
others you thought about, and those in Queens or whatever?
Yeah, Queens is actually, that's a great point. We wanted to have a walk in Queens. There was a point where like it's really important for us to also not just be in Manhattan, but also in other parts of New York City that are not in your typical travel guide. But Queens is really hard to walk, or harder than Manhattan. Then we curated a bike tour through Queens. But
Next book.
It's harder to read and ride.
It is hard. It's just like, now we're doing bikes, let's just like, And we do have a long list of women that are places that we want to highlight, and that would be volume 2 probably.
Bike away.
Bike away. But really it was just about the distances for the walks, and so that then it makes sense and not back and forth. Thanks for coming out. It's very dark. Oh, there's one more question. Yes.
So I know you'll probably get this question when you do your reading in Asheville, but do you have the notes on the tours that you and Kaitlyn started? Do you still keep this?
Oh, all the notes from like,
When
yeah.
you started doing the Asheville
Oh,
idea?
when- yeah, we still have everything.
You read
Yeah,
it
we'll
up.
be in Asheville.
Yeah.
Sarah. We'll be in Asheville in 2 weeks or a week with a reading at the bookstore where we met, which will feel really nice. Get excited. And we do, and maybe there's going to be a walkable by Asheville because Asheville is also very walkable. Yeah. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for
Yeah.
coming out on this super cold Tuesday night.